If you want to know about the end times, one of the best places to look is John's book of Revelation, sometimes called the Apocalypse. So I've chosen a reading today from his chapter 21 in that extraordinary, it's the last book of the New Testament. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had disappeared, and there was no sea anymore. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It was prepared like a bride dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice in the throne saying, "Now God's presence is with people, and he will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, sadness, crying, or pain, because all the old ways are gone." And the angel carried me away by the Spirit to a very large and high mountain. He showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It was shining with the glory of God and was bright like a very expensive jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the city's temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, because the glory of God is its light, and the Lamb is the city's lamp. By its light, the people of the world will walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. The city's gates will never be shut on any day, because there is no night there. The glory and the honor of the nations will be brought into it. Nothing unclean, and no one who does shameful things or tell lies will ever get into it. Only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life will enter the city. Words inspired by God. So, as you may remember from last Sunday, I've chosen a theme for the next, for this 3-week session, which I call the origin and the evolution of the cosmos. And last week I looked at what I called, from then to now, from the beginning until the present moment. And today I want to move forward and call it perhaps from now to then, from the place we're in to the future of our cosmos. And so I'll divide it up into maybe 4 main points this morning. I want to talk firstly about 4 possible futures. And then I'm going to talk about a new concept I have, which I call trifurcation. And then thirdly, God is dead, or is it us? And then fourthly, we volunteer to be here now. So that's what I'll cover this morning with God's help. Pádraig Ó Maille was a priest of the Celtigan Fathers. He was a native Irish speaker. Gaelic was his mother tongue. And he was ordained 15 years before me. He was ordained in 1957. And I had the privilege of meeting him many, many, many times. He was a brilliant, brilliant man and an extraordinary teacher. He won many, many awards as a teacher, both in Africa and in Ireland. And once he was ordained in 1957, he was sent as a missionary to Nigeria, to the eastern part of Nigeria, particularly to work among the Igbo people. If you want to check out that word, it's spelled I-G-B-O. And Pádraig was also a real deeply committed Irish patriot. It was in his blood. And so when he got teaching, he was sent to a teacher training college as a lecturer there. And he began to try to groom his students in independent thinking and freedom of all kinds. And one of his students, who turned out to be his star pupil subsequently, was a man called Chinua Achebe. And many of you may have heard of him. Chinua Achebe was an Igbo, born in 1930 and died actually in the United States in 2013. And he wrote a very famous book, possibly some people would say the greatest piece of English literature ever to come out of Africa. And he entitled it, Things Fall Apart. And he was writing about the effect that the white presence, either through colonialists or even missionaries, had on the Igbo people of Nigeria. the good, the bad, and the ugly that happened because of the meeting of these two cultures. And in fact, Pádraig Ó Maille was actually thrown out of Nigeria in 1968 at the beginning of the Biafran War, because he was thought to be promoting the independence of the Igbo people from the rest of Nigeria. So he was thrown out of Nigeria and finished his days as a missionary actually in Malawi. But the interesting thing was this title of Chinua Achebe's great book, Things Fall Apart, is straight out of William Butler Yeats. And Pádraig Ó Maille had introduced his students to the writings of William Butler Yeats. And William Butler Yeats was an Irish patriot who in 1920, during the Irish freedom struggle, had written a beautiful poem called The Second Coming. And there's one line in that poem that says, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold." And Chinua Achebe took the first part of that and made it the title of his very, very famous book. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. And from where we sit right now in human history, and we look forward, it could well be the story of our times. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. As we look forward, we look at our own community, like COJ, we look at our nation, United States, we look at the world situation. Certainly it's time fraught with lots of difficulties for all of us. And we have no idea whether it can hold together or whether it's going to fall asunder. So I want to focus on that, the good news and the bad news of that possibility. Because one of the things Chinua Achebe did with his famous book was to look at both the benefits, and the difficulties associated with the mixture of the white culture with the Igbo people. And so I'll talk about four main points then, as I said. So firstly, I want to look at what I believe is the four possible futures. I don't believe that there's a fated, inevitable future. I don't believe in the future as a fated inevitability. I believe rather that it's either a probable future or a possible future. And the probable future happens if we don't change what we're doing. Then we can predict very accurately what it's going to look like in 50 years' time or 100 years' time if we continue to do things the way we're doing things right now. That would be the probable future. There's also a possible future, and that comes about when we change the way we're behaving as human beings vis-a-vis each other and vis-a-vis the planet itself. Then there's a very different future can emerge. And as I think about this, it seems to me that there are four main possibilities of the future. The first one is kind of, you would call it a normal evolution. So when we look, for instance, at the evolution of the hominids on the planet, we went from, to kind of synopsize it radically, we went from Homo habilis to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens to Homo sapiens sapiens. We also, at this stage in human history, human beings on average have never been taller than they are right now, or they haven't lived as long as we live right now. On average, there were dips obviously at various times. And in fact, in actual fact, it's predicted that our children will have shorter lifespans than we have. So, but there are occasional dips. But by and large, you can say that there's a normal trajectory for evolution to become more and more complex, left to its own devices. That would be the first possible future. The second possible future, I believe, would be what I'm going to call surgically enhanced evolution. And this is where, through some kinds of technological implants of various kinds, our sensorium can be extended, for instance. Maybe we get to be able to see the way eagles see, birds of prey. Maybe we have a sense of smell, which is like, a bloodhound has, or a sense of hearing like a bat, which hears at 100,000 cycles per second. Or maybe we can be implanted with a device that allows us to learn a new language in 3 days, or to improve our IQ level. That's another possibility, surgically implanted enhancements. A third possibility is what we might be called the cyborg, literally a human-machine interface, what's sometimes called EBEs, extra biological entities, so that it is part, carbon-based life and part silicon-based life. So some kind of a cyborg, a meshing of biology with machinery. That's a possible future. And the fourth future is artificial intelligence, robots who are much more intelligent than us and finally wipe us out, and that the future is actually robotic. So these are four very possible futures. In 1895, H.G. Wells wrote a very famous book called Time Traveler, in which he looked at the pluses and the minuses of technology as it was even then, 1895. And in this book, it's a kind of a novel form, fictional, he talked about two different races of people. One he called the ÓLaoire, E-L-O-I, and the other he called the Morlocks, M-O-R-L-O-C-K-S. And the ÓLaoire are descended from the idle rich, and the Morlocks are descended from the working poor. And the ÓLaoire live a life of ease on the surface of the planet, and the Morlocks live underground, tending the machinery and providing food and clothing for the ÓLaoire. Now, there are some among us who are actually trying to make that a reality. People who are aggregating the resources of the planet. 86 people right now own 50% of the resources of planet Earth. And moreover, there are attempts to create that kind of a bifurcation in the human planet. We have people like Elon Musk advocating neuronal implants. We have people like Ray Kurzweil talking about the singularity when evolution goes asymptotic. Asymptotic is a mathematical concept, where an infinite amount of development happens in an almost zero timeline. So if you're to imagine a graph where the one axis, the x-axis would be time, and the y-axis would be development. And so the graph, instead of going linearly, it begins to sweep up until finally the graph itself is almost going vertically. And they call that the singularity. The graph has gone asymptotic. There's an infinite amount of development in zero amount of time. So there's a singularity and there's a breakthrough of some kind. And there are people in Silicon Valley who are actually working to make that happen. Now, whether you're talking about, surgically enhanced people through implantation, or cyborgs, or a future of biological and machine people, these people are going to be both eminently programmable and eminently hackable. And so whoever's in charge of the algorithm can actually determine what you're thinking, program you to think what they want you to think, and hack you if you're not thinking what they want to think. That is a real possibility into our future. That's my first point. The second point I'm going to call trifurcation. For many, many, many years, I've been talking about a concept of bifurcation, where I really believe that we're at a place where there's going to be a splitting of the ways between two groups that I've called Homo Sociopathicus, who are that small oligarchy dedicated to the control of everybody else by aggregating all of the resources of the planet. And on the other side, Homo Spiritualis, people founded on compassion and love. Now, if you want to put two different words for it, it's a kind of a transhumanism versus the true human being. There's a beautiful phrase that appears. I've only come across it in the Gnostic Gospels. I've never seen it, anyplace else in the New Testament. It's this notion, it's called the true human being. And what is the true human being? In the Gnostic Gospels, it's the person who's discovered the mystical interiority of the self, the realization that we're all bite-sized pieces of God. And the transhumanist agenda is to make us either cyborgs or robotic figures who are eminently hackable or programmable. A man called Rahm Emanuel was the mayor of Chicago from 2011 to 2019. And he famously said at one stage, never waste a good crisis. Never waste a good crisis, whether it's a natural event or a manufactured crisis. Now, there are two ways of unpacking that statement of Rahm Emanuel. I'm not going to judge him. I don't know what he meant by what he said. But you could either say that never waste a good crisis. You could say use it in order to create further chaos and create control over the masses. Or you could say you could use a crisis in order to kind of grow and discover your own divinity and the divinity of everybody else. So the crisis is an opportunity for freedom and for love, or for chaos and control. Now, at this stage, I'm beginning to think that rather than a bifurcation, the human species is facing, I'm going to call it a trifurcation between Homo Sociopathicus, Homo Spiritualis, and what I'm going to call now today, Homo Artificialis. And I really foresee a possibility in the not too distant future when we're going to be faced with those kinds of choices. Which group will we belong to? Where are we going to put our energies? And where will we put our spirituality particularly? That's my second point. The third point I'm going to call God is dead, or is it us? It seems that many of us, particularly the materialists among us and materialistic scientists, particularly among us, we are so advanced at this stage that we don't believe that God ever exists. And in fact, those people who are in that camp think that those who believe in God are very unsophisticated kind of natives who belong to a previous period of human history. And that the world we live in, actually, we're simply, as humans, a branch of random mutations in a meaningless cosmos, blundering along without either purpose or destination in mind. There is no teleology to this model. There's no destination. It's not going anywhere. It's blundering along blindly due to a kind of random mutation and survival of the fittest. And I wonder sometimes if we become cyborgs, or if we're taken over actually by robots. At some stage, will some artificial intelligence make the same claim and say that human beings were simply a figment of the imagination of earlier, less intelligent robots? Is some kind of a future, I'm going to call it a philosopher robot. Instead of saying God is dead, is this, philosopher bot going to say Homo sapiens is dead? And so in reality, we're in the middle of a battle for the soul of the planet, I believe, perhaps even for the soul of the cosmos. Since we are holographic fractals of source, meaning that every one of us is a scaled down version of the original. But since we're holographic, we contain every part of the original, even though in the fragment, a scaled down version of it. And so in a sense, insofar as we're struggling for the survival of our own soul and love, we're struggling for the survival of the cosmos itself. We're literally in a time when we're struggling for the soul of the planet itself. And there are dark, dark materialistic forces trying to push us into this God is dead model. It's my third point. I want to show the positive part of it, where I'm going with this. We volunteered to be here now. I keep repeating that. I'm totally convinced. There is nobody on the planet who did not volunteer to be here now. And as far as I'm concerned, there's only one sin. All of the other sins like stealing or telling lies or whatever, they're kind of epiphenomena. They're just kind of secondary eruptions. The only sin is the refusal to wake up. And the most destructive thing any one of us can do right now is to sleep our way through these times in which we find ourselves. Now, in each incarnation, and I believe obviously that we come back here multiple times, because it is impossible to grok the human experience by simply finding yourselves in one particular configuration, like a male or a black or an Afghani or an Irishman or whatever. And so we have to come back again and again and again until we fully grok the human incarnational experience. And for each incarnation, it seems to me, we choose to work on, as individuals, 2 or 3 specific virtues. And we embrace the development of those as our mission each incarnation. And so, for instance, an incarnation may be dedicated to developing courage and compassion, or maybe patience and forgiveness, or maybe gratitude and resilience. But again and again and again, we have these missions as human beings to develop these kinds of virtues. Overall, we have the mission to try to replace fear with love, to try to replace anxiety with trust, to try to replace anger with compassion, to try to replace judgment with wisdom, and to try to replace revenge with forgiveness. That's on the individual basis. But I want to take a leap forward now, because I want to make the claim that when we volunteered to be here now, and when we were groomed by our mentors, our angelic mentors before we came, we were groomed not just for personal salvation. It is not about personal salvation. It's not about getting it, say, wow, I'm glad I escaped that lot. And then watch while I'm eating popcorn, at people who are still left on planet Earth. It's not about personal salvation, and it's not even about working off personal karma. We volunteered here to be here in order to upgrade the very species, the very planet itself. In fact, all sentient beings. And to work off all, not just karma self-generated, but karma generated by beings at all levels, because anything that is agency generates karma. And by karma, I don't mean just the bad stuff. I mean the good stuff and the bad stuff. So we volunteered to come down here in order to be agents of change for the entire cosmos itself. And that's why I kept repeating this great story about the Montreal Special Olympics, where the little guy falls during the 100-yard dash and all the other competitors come back and pick him up and they walk across the finishing line together. That's what it's about. If I were to use a kind of a graphic analogy, we are like the shock troops on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. There's only one problem. Most of us have fallen asleep on the boats as we crossed the English Channel. Most of us are asleep on the boats as we cross the English Channel, even though we volunteered for this emancipation of Europe. Whether or not I as an individual or you as an individual live to see this evolutionary shift completed is not that important, because we're bequeathing it to our children and to our grandchildren. They are the ones who will reap the benefits. And moreover, since I believe in reincarnation, it's actually you put money in the bank for a future incarnation of your own. So you're working for those, you may not see the outcome, but certainly in this lifetime perhaps, but certainly in the future. And maybe most importantly, your children and your grandchildren will inherit what you've handed on to them. Paul says very famously at one stage, one man sows, another man weeds, and a third man harvests. I would say that's spread out over many, many incarnations. One person in one incarnation sows the seeds of this evolutionary process. In another incarnation, they water it. In a third incarnation, they weed it. And then maybe in a fourth incarnation, they begin to harvest it. So I have to believe that what we're experiencing in our world, in our country, and even in our community they're labor pains. They're not death rattles, but labor pains. So I want to finish with a final metaphor, one which was very, very meaningful to me. I believe that you and I are playing in the game of our life. In fact, this is a game of many lifetimes. You're playing in a game that many, many, many years ago, before Oprah came up with the title, I'd come up with the title and I'd published it in the previous book. I called it Super Soul Sunday. You're playing in a game which is called Super Soul Sunday. And the greatest games, if you've ever taken part in team sports, the greatest games are the ones in which you snatch a miraculous victory from the jaws of seeming inevitable defeat. And I'm reminded of this. I've only seen 2 Super Bowls in my entire life, until I don't do on a television set. In 2017, I went to a friend's house. I watched the 2017 Super Bowl between the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons. And this friend of mine was talking about this local boy called Tom Brady, who was this brilliant quarterback, the likes of which had never been seen before. And I watched the first half of it, and it was an extraordinary one-sided affair. At halftime, the Falcons were leading the Patriots by 21-3. And in Super Bowl history, no team had ever come back from a deficit of more than 10 points. So my friend got up and he walked out of his own house, leaving me on his own. And I sat through the second half. And the second half got off to a disastrous start. The Falcons scored another touchdown almost immediately. And it was now 28-3. And then Tom Brady came alive. And by the end of normal time, it was tied 28-28. And it went into overtime, which was the first ever in Super Bowl history. And it ended with a 34-28 victory for the Patriots. And for me, it became this most extraordinary, vivid inspiration. In other words, what Tom Brady did for the Patriots at that stage is what we can do for our planet at this stage. Because no matter how dire the game of Lila appears to us right now, each of us has the ability to play like Tom Brady. Namaste, my friends.